So mainly all we're doing here is talking shop. So as far out into the weeds as you want to go, I'm going to follow. Probably won't get into too much personal stuff. I may ask you, how you respond to the bitterness and resentment of, some of the older crowd here in Nashville just for the success that your hair has had. We're rolling. Welcome, I'm Clint Black, and tonight I am talking in circles with Marty Stuart.
Hello, Clint Black.
Yeah. So many things that I want to cover with you, but I don't know how I'm going to squeeze all of it in because you got out really, really early, and my introduction was the bars, and you're out touring with legendary acts. So you got an introduction and an education that very, very few people ever get.
Well, I got here in 1972, and Labor Day weekend 1972, and I had been out on the road with a bluegrass gospel band called the Sullivan Family Gospel Singers. I'm from Mississippi, so they were kind of stars in the Southland down there. And my parents kind of got used to me being gone for the summer, but when the Sullivan family dropped me back off, and I had to study, and I was a pitiful excuse for a student because I knew the band was playing somewhere and I wasn't there with them. And I got kicked out of school for reading a country music song roundup, which was an old magazine back then, inside of my history book. And so the teacher I got lost in the story, and the history teacher kind of came up behind me and knocked it out of my hands. If you'd get your mind off that garbage and get it on to history, you might make something out of yourself. And smart aleck here said, well, I'd rather make history than learn about it. so dismissed. The next thing I know, I'd taken a buddy of mine's name down who played mandolin in Lester Flatt's band here at the Grand Ole Opry. He invited me casually to come to Nashville. I called him. I said, this might be a good time for me to come see you. So I begged and pleaded my parents to let me come up here. So on a Thursday night of Labor Day weekend, I got off of a Greyhound bus. The old Greyhound station was in front of the Ryman. And I came face to face with the Ryman Auditorium. And it almost made me cry because in the South where I come from, country music, the people who played it and wrote it, and it was just a part of the atmosphere. They were family to me. And I knew I belonged behind those doors. And 2 weeks later, Lester Flatt had given me a job. So
yeah, of course. Of course he did, because you're a kid who just showed up.
Well, I love the people that played on that show. I'd listen to the Grand Ole Opry on my little radio, and I felt like I was a part of those songs. I felt like the people that sang those songs were a part of our family, And so I got here as fast as I could. You did too, so here we are.
I wanted to be a singer, and you didn't really want to be a singer, right? You tried to avoid
I put it off as long as I could.
Yeah.
And but the truth of the matter, I was practicing my autograph in the 3rd grade. I knew what I wanted to do. But I got, again, walking amongst those people, I've said it many times, is that walking into the Grand Ole Opry carrying Lester Flatt's guitar case is like walking into the Vatican with the Pope. It was instant acceptance. You talked about you had to slug it out in bars to get started. I had to work my way down to bars down through the years, but that's where I started at that level. And I wish every kid in the world that is threatening to play country music or thinking about it could have had the same start that I did, because the wisdom, the wit, the access to those people, and the music that was played and the history that was made during those times, it will serve you for a lifetime.
Wisdom is not usually valued by the young.
No.
You really have to shove it into their brains. But the people you were getting it from, you looked up to and admired so much, you listened more than the rest of us did probably to those who were trying to get it into us.
But you know what? One of the differences is that I didn't have to have a song to get started. And I started by way of being a musician. But there's a saying in this town that it all begins with a song. And your first song was Killing Time, right?
Better Man, yeah.
Better Man, yeah. Better Man, and then Killing Time. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I don't know if you remember this, there was a record pressing plant out in Kansas City. And when you're a young star trying to get started, they take you to all the places. And I've been hearing Better Man, and then here comes Killing Time. And I thought, wow, we got something here that's really special. And I remember going to that record pressing plant in the early 90s in Kansas City, and they had to keep people on staff like for extra hours and hours to print your first album. There were stacks of them, and I stole a bunch of them.
Yeah, I'd love to have a copy if
Well,
you got it.
There's a few left for anybody. But man, you came on, that it brings truth to that statement. It begins with a song. You were ready for it. You had that look in your eye, and you were a star. And I don't know if you remember this, but the first time you and I met, for real, you were playing, it was you, and the Judds were playing with Carl Perkins. And you were in Vegas, and me and my band were opening out. It was our first tour. We were opening for Willie Nelson, and you and I wound up together in Vegas watching the Judds and Carl Perkins. And I remember you had a handful of cash, and you walked out onto the floor, and you just went, I might as well give it to him this way.
Yeah, I don't remember doing that a lot.
Well, you impressed me by doing that.
Well, it was the time in my life where I'd gotten checks that paid more than my rent.
Yeah.
And
Right.
And I remember thinking, God, I've got more money than I'll ever spend. And I really thought, this is as much money as I'll ever need. And then I realized later, no, the attorneys are going to need a lot more. So over the years, I learned that, no, you really got to have some stored away. But that's the first guitar that Killing Time bought right there. When
Really?
I got my first check, I ran out, and the guy who had always given me discounts on anything I bought my guitar on layaway from him, gave me the best deal on strings. He was helping a starving musician, and I walked in and bought that at full price. I refused to take a discount. I was so proud that for the first time in my life, I was able to buy something for what it was listed for.
Don't you agree? It gets a little backwards. When you're trying to get started, it's hard to find a discount,
Yeah.
And then when you finally get there, they want to give you guitars, and I always refuse them. As best I can, I say, find a young artist, find a young songwriter, find a young guitar player that needs his guitar, and give it to them.
Yeah.
That's the way to do it.
So at some point, you were forced to sing. You're writing songs, and of course, all the hits were coming. And I remember when Pilgrim came out, that was a big, bold statement. And you did it with I think 30 songs or something, at least in the deluxe. It was huge.
I like what our friend Kathy Mateo, she says, I'm a recovering 90s artist. And the 90s, as you well know, there was kind of an unprecedented time in country music. I mean, Donald Duck could have had a hit in the 90s around here. It was just everybody had the opportunity to get famous that wanted to be famous, it seemed, for a moment, for a split second. And I was ready, and in lots of ways I probably wasn't. But we ran that course, and it was highly successful. And one day it quit working, and I chased for about 5 minutes, and it made me miserable to chase. And I thought, this is not, you were taught better. Lester Flatt taught you better than this. Johnny Cash taught you better than this. All those people you worked for, those masters taught you that you do not chase. You follow your heart, and that is the chart. If they both line up, then you got something. And so I've lived by that. But the Pilgrim was the turning point. I went, I have to rethink this. And I went deep, went back to my heart and my soul, went back to my Mississippi roots. And I made a record that was really deep, and I knew that it was going to be a spiritual victory, but probably a critical mess, which is exactly how it worked out. And I went to Johnny Cash. I called 822-5615. I said, Chief, I need to come see you. And so I went over there, and he said, what's on your mind? And John, he made me a glass of iced tea, and he stirred it with his finger like that and said, what's on your mind, son? I said, well, I made this record called The Pilgrim. And he was on it. He said, yeah, I know, I was on it. And I told him, I said, I gave my heart and soul to it. It was the best thing I've ever done. Finally have something I can listen to, because I really can't listen to the last 10 years worth of my work. And they turned it down. I said, it's getting more raves. And he said, knowing the full consequences of what you have done, would you do it again? I said, absolutely, in a heartbeat. He said, there's your answer. And he said, are you proud of your work? I said, yes, sir. He says, there's your answer. And I thought he was through talking. He says, I know what you're talking about. I feel your pain. He says, but he says, you will outlive this. And I'm telling you that the people who you telling me are going to drop you from your label, there will come a time that that label probably won't even exist, and the building won't exist anymore. And the people that are about to drop you won't be powerful record people anymore, but you still would have followed your heart, and this record will live on. And so last year was the 20th anniversary of the Pilgrim. There was a book created around it. It was released with bonus tracks. There's an off-Broadway play being developed now about the Pilgrim. So he was right again. He was right again. So the bottom line is follow your heart.
Yeah, if I were going to introduce someone to your music who lived under a rock, that's what I would give them.
Well, thank you.
And it seems like a gargantuan undertaking. And I think the thing that I would be most curious about is sequencing. Making that thing flow, laying it out the way it did. Well, the hardest things for me to do with a piece of work is, what order do I put this in?
Right. Well, what looked good on paper was one thing, and what the speakers said was another. And you've done a lot of films, and you understand editing films. And it's all, at the end of the day, it's always about the story, right? The story, the Pilgrim was a story, and it had to tell itself as a flowing thing. I wanted to make the record where you could drop the needle at any point and get something good out of it, or listen to it as a whole. And the coolest story about the sequence was the ending. I didn't know how to end. I couldn't get out of the record. And I collect architectural antiques. I love Gothic architecture. And everywhere I go, I'm a cathedral hopper, and I love looking at stained glass windows and cool doors and those kind of things. We were in Austin, and I was told that there was a family that collected European architectural antiques. And so they granted me an appointment. So there was this one piece of glass that I saw. I said, is that for sale? She said, yeah. And it had some words at the bottom that I did not see because there was so much dust on it for about 3 or 4 months. And the words proved to be a Tennyson poem that said, then move the trees, the copses nod, wings flutter, nights hover clear. O just and faithful night of God, ride on, the prize is near. So pass I hostile hall and grange, by bridge, by fork, by part, by pale. All armed I ride, whatever bear betide, till I find the Holy Grail. And I said the lonesome pilgrim far from home. And I saw that one morning in my basement, and the light was coming through, and I got a rag, and I said, there's the ending into the Pilgrim. And I heard Johnny Cash saying those words. And I called him, and he was in Jamaica, and we took the machines down to Jamaica for 30 seconds worth of that. But it was worth it. But I finally found the ending. But it was a long way to get there. It was a long way to get there.
So when you formed Marty Stuart and the Fabulous Superlatives, of course, I'm thinking of all the other names you could have gone with. The just okay sort of superlatives. First of all, starting a band at that point in your career and in your life, was it an actual band? Because, when you become an artist, you start making records, you have, they call them sidemen. You have your band. A lot of my guys were with me forever, but, the idea of having a band, that's kind of a democracy in my mind.
The 90s were over. We're in the year 2000 now, or 2001, I forget. And I had it with the 90s. I was done with that character. I was done with all the above. And I took inventory one day. I thought, okay, you have one of the world's finest Telecasters. You got some cool cowboy boots. You're married to Connie Smith. You got a Cadillac and $150 in 2 banks and $100 in your pocket. You might ought to follow your heart and do what you believe in now. So we put this band together as a rehearsal. Kenny Vaughan, Harry Stinson, a fellow named Brian Glenn at the time. And after halfway through the first rehearsal, I shut it down. I said, we have to rethink this. This is not about chasing little records up and down one street in Nashville anymore. I remembered a picture I saw when I was a little boy of Louis Armstrong in a tuxedo playing his trumpet in front of one of the pyramids in Egypt. And I thought he can go anywhere on planet Earth and represent the world of jazz with his musicians and be known as that guy. And I thought, okay, I get it. And so we set out and we took our case to the people. We didn't care about charts or demographics. So we started looking for the disenfranchised people, the peoples whose stories weren't being told. We took it to the back roads of America, and we played out, back to the light. And so we needed a name, and right up the street from your fabulous studio here, there is a florist called Emma's Florist. It's an old traditional Southern florist. And they used to have radio spots that would come on with like lush strings, and the announcer would say, "Mom's carnations, rhododendrons. Think of mother for Mother's Day." And the tagline was Emma's, the superlative. He could make superlative sound that big. And I thought, we ought to call ourselves the Superlatives. And I thought, after that guy at Emma's Florist, and I thought, how about the Fabulous Superlatives?
It's gotta be better.
But we better damn well live up to it, you know?
It's gotta be better.
So that's how the Superlatives started, and we have lived by our mantra as a band is we believe in it, we'll pay to do it. If we don't believe in it, you don't have enough money to get us to do it. And it's been a lonely spot sometimes, but it's been a rewarding spot, and we have lived from that perspective from the first day.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's great. And the TV show on RFD, fantastic.
Thank you.
I starve for it and search it out to great music being played live on TV.
I had a mission in mind with that show. For years, I mean, my dad was a factory guy down in Mississippi. And our time together, he worked hard. And our time together was on Saturday afternoons. And I'd sit as close to Daddy as I could on the couch. And we shared a love for country music. And we watched the Porter Wagner Show and Flatt and Scruggs Show and the good old Nashville music and Del Reeves Country Carnival, all those 30-minute syndicated shows that they would make in this town and ship out to different regions. And there was my town there was an awful civil rights story in 1964. It felt awful in our town. There was so much hate and dissension in the air. But when those shows would come on, especially the Porter Wagner Show, it would lift. And there was joy in the room again. And when they would go off, you could just feel the heaviness come back. So that's where I felt the power of music for the first time. And for years in this town, I would go around, why don't somebody do a 21st century of the Porter Wagner Show? With, hay bells and winking like, yeah, we know what we're doing. Yeah. And so I stumbled into that RFD channel by accident on the bus one night and watched the whole dang FFA convention. I went, whoever... And I called Patrick Gotch, and he came, and we figured it out. So we did 156 episodes of those shows. But the point was that the old-timers that raised me, and I am a firm believer that greatness is always great. You don't have to cut away people just because they're older. Or the culture of country music, those things that speak to my heart, they were kind of sliding over the edge, and I thought, if we don't do this right now, we're never going to get this done. So we staged that show, very stylized, but it was about preserving that one more time and getting a lot of those people back into their greatness. And we worked hard at the music, so we did 156 episodes, and it still plays. And I think it's a timeless kind of document.
I'll do some more.
You got it.
And let's get up to 1,000 episodes. So we're not done yet.
Okay.
I've got one more question for you. When you get to heaven, if you could sing a song with anyone who's already there, who would it be, and what song would you sing?
Ooh, that's hard. Maybe the father of country music, Jimmy Rogers.
Great
And
answer.
I probably would sit down. I would probably like to sit down and play Waiting for a Train with him.
Yeah,
That's pretty good.
great song.
Yeah.
T for Texas, I think I'd
That's a
have
great
to
one.
do.
They're all good.
Yeah.
They're all good.
That's a great answer. That's a first for this show, Jimmy Rogers.
Do you
I
remember?
should have known you'd go back to the beginning.
Did you hear what Mother Teresa was asked one time? They said, when you get to heaven, what's the first thing you're going to say to God? And Mother Teresa said, I'm going to look at him and tell him how much I love him. And then I'm going to say, you've got a lot of explaining to do. That's good.
Great.
That's good. I love you, Clint Black.
Yeah, I love you
You're
too,
a good
man. Thanks for being here.
My
Marty Stuart,
pleasure.
everybody.